They said the champion chose him at random. No record, no reputation, no visible school, just a quiet man standing at the edge of a crowded exhibition hall, hands relaxed, posture unremarkable. The undefeated karate title holder had already broken 3 boards and dismissed 2 challengers that evening. What happened next lasted less than 10 seconds. No one cheered when it ended, because by the time they understood what they had witnessed, the demonstration was already over and the champion was no longer the same man who had stepped forward. The year was marked by rivalry, not in headlines, but the quieter tension that travels between schools, across dojos, and through the conversations of instructors who measure legitimacy by lineage and results. It was a period when martial arts were not yet global commodities. Systems guarded their methods. Masters protected their reputations. Demonstrations were not merely performances, they were declarations. The exhibition hall stood at the center of that atmosphere. It was a modest municipal venue, large enough to seat several hundred, with polished wooden flooring and banners hung high along the walls. The insignias of different karate associations were displayed with precision, black ink against white cloth. Rows of folding chairs faced a central mat bordered by tape. A raised table at the side accommodated senior instructors and invited guests. The event had been organized as a public showcase of traditional karate. Word had spread beyond the local community. A handful of instructors from other disciplines were present as observers, not invited to compete, but welcome to watch. In that era, watching was often more significant than speaking. The air inside carried the scent of varnish and starch from freshly pressed uniforms. Conversations were measured. Laughter was restrained. Even casual exchanges contained an undercurrent of evaluation. People watched posture. They assessed stance. They noticed calluses on knuckles and the way belts were tied. Reputation was visible. Demonstrations of kata were performed first, sequences executed with crisp precision, each movement stopping as if cut by a blade. Young black belts struck them with disciplined shouts, splintering pine in controlled arcs. Applause followed, polite and rhythmic. Then came the exhibition matches. Light contact, controlled speed, superiority without risking injury, no humiliation. The purpose was demonstration, not spectacle. Yet everyone present understood the unspoken truth. Exhibitions were rarely neutral. They were moments to confirm hierarchy. The undefeated karate champion, though not yet introduced that evening, had already drawn attention simply by entering the building earlier. He was known among instructors. He had competed, traveled, and returned with victories. His style was clean, his timing precise. He carried himself with the quiet assurance of someone accustomed to winning. Students pointed discreetly when he walked past. He sat near the front, posture upright, hands resting on his thighs. Occasionally he nodded in acknowledgement when greeted by other instructors. Across the hall, near the back row, stood a man few noticed. He wore no uniform. His clothing was plain, dark trousers, a simple shirt. His hair was short. He carried no bag, no visible equipment. To the casual observer, he might have appeared as a curious civilian or perhaps a former practitioner who had stepped away from formal training. He did not sit immediately. He stood with relaxed posture, hands loosely clasped behind him. His gaze did not wander across the crowd. Instead, he watched the mat, not intensely, not critically, simply attentively. There was no tension in him. One of the junior organizers had extended him an invitation weeks earlier after hearing rumors of his training. Few knew he would attend. He had arrived alone. When he finally took a seat, it was near the aisle, several rows from the back. He did not greet anyone. No students approached him. No instructors recognized him. And yet, those who later spoke about The evening would recall something unusual about his presence, not dominance, not intimidation. Stillness. As the exhibition matches began, the tempo in the room shifted slightly. Footwork quickened. Gloves made light contact with forearms. Controlled kicks snapped through the air and halted inches from targets. The audience leaned forward in synchronized anticipation. The undefeated champion remained seated during the first few rounds. He watched carefully. Occasionally he whispered brief observations to the instructor beside him, corrections about distance, timing, guard placement. He did not criticize. He analyzed. Near the back, the quiet observer's expression remained unchanged. He followed movements without reacting to successful strikes or minor errors. His attention seemed to settle not on the outcomes of exchanges, but on the transitions between them, the brief spaces where fighters reset their balance. An instructor seated nearby noticed the way he watched and turned to study him more closely. There was something unfamiliar about his posture. It was neither rigid nor casual. It was balanced, as if he were standing even while seated. But the instructor said nothing. The matches concluded without incident. Applause echoed briefly before fading. A short intermission was announced. Students gathered in small clusters to discuss what they had seen. It was during this intermission that the tone of the evening began to change. A senior organizer approached the front table and exchanged quiet words with the undefeated champion. Their conversation lasted less than a minute. The champion nodded once. When the event resumed, the organizer stepped forward to address the audience. His voice carried calmly across the hall. In the spirit of demonstration, he said, Following that, we will allow a short open challenge for educational purposes. The phrase open challenge traveled through the room like a current. Students straightened. Instructors adjusted their posture. The idea was not new, but it was rare in a formal setting. An open challenge was controlled unpredictability. It invited comparison. The champion stood. He walked to the center of the mat without flourish. His steps were measured. He bowed to the senior instructor's table, then turned toward the audience and bowed again. Applause followed, respectful, confident. He began with demonstration techniques, combinations executed at moderate speed with a volunteer partner. The strikes were crisp, efficient. Each movement ended precisely where intended. His control was evident. He allowed the audience to see the structure behind his power. When the demonstration concluded, he returned to the center and faced the crowd. "Is there anyone," he said evenly, "who would like to exchange for learning?" There was no arrogance in his tone, but there was certainty. Several students glanced at one another. A few younger black belts shifted forward in their seats, tempted but cautious. Even in controlled exchange, hierarchy could be reinforced publicly. Silence settled. The champion waited patiently. He did not scan the room aggressively. He simply stood, hands relaxed at his sides, near the back. The quiet observer remained seated. For a moment, it seemed the challenge would pass unanswered. Then one of the junior organizers, perhaps remembering the invitation extended weeks earlier, turned and looked toward the aisle. Their eyes met. A subtle nod was exchanged. The quiet man rose. No announcement preceded him. No drumbeat of expectation. He stepped into the aisle and walked forward at an unhurried pace. As he approached the mat, murmurs began. He wore no uniform. He did not adjust his sleeves. He did not remove a belt. There was none. His clothing did not signal rank or affiliation. Several students assumed he must be inexperienced. An instructor near the front leaned toward another and whispered, "Who is he?" The question carried no malice, only curiosity. The quiet man reached the edge of the mat and stopped. He removed his shoes calmly and placed them side by side. He stepped onto the mat and bowed, not deeply, not ceremonially, but respectfully. Champion studied him for the first time. There was no visible muscle tension, no exaggerated stance. The man's breathing was steady. His gaze met the champion's briefly, then softened, not evasive, not challenging. The absence of familiar signals was subtle, but it registered. In structured competition, opponents reveal themselves before engagement. They settle into known stances. They signal intention through posture. This man did neither. The champion nodded politely. The audience, uncertain whether to anticipate a brief exchange or a prolonged contest, grew quiet. The senior instructors leaned forward slightly in their chairs. In that stillness, the exhibition hall transformed. What had begun as a demonstration of hierarchy was becoming something else, though few yet understood how. There was no announcement of names. The undefeated champion extended his hand briefly in acknowledgement. The quiet man accepted it. Two figures stood at center mat, one recognized, one unmarked. The room held its breath, not out of excitement, but out of uncertainty. Some witnesses would later say that the shift in atmosphere occurred not when the exchange began, but in the seconds before it, when the quiet man adjusted nothing. No stance, no ritual. Only balance, and in that absence of preparation, something unsettled the air. The exhibition hall, once defined by banners and rank, became simply a space between two men. The organizer stepped back. The exchange was about to begin. The tension did not feel dramatic. It felt instructional. And that distinction would matter. Before the exchange began, the champion did what he had always done. He observed. Years of disciplined competition had trained him to read opponents quickly: shoulders, hips, weight distribution, the placement of the rear foot. These details spoke louder than introductions. From them, he could infer style, speed, and preferred range. He began that assessment the moment the quiet man stepped onto the mat. There was no visible tension in the challenger's shoulders. His arms rested naturally at his sides, not raised, not guarded. His feet were placed neither wide nor narrow, simply balanced beneath him. To the untrained eye, it might have looked careless. To the champion, it was unfamiliar. He circled once, slowly, maintaining formal distance. It was standard procedure, establishing rhythm before contact. The quiet man turned with him, not mirroring exactly, but adjusting without visible effort. Still no stance. No chambered fists. No preparatory bounce common among tournament fighters. The champion felt the subtle pressure of the audience behind him. Students were watching closely. Fellow instructors were evaluating not only technique, but composure. As the evenings featured authority, he carried responsibility to demonstrate clarity, to show structure and motion. An open challenge was never entirely neutral. It was, in part, a reaffirmation of rank. He extended a probing front kick, not full speed, not intended to land, simply a rangefinder. It halted inches from the challenger's midsection. The quiet man did not retreat. Dramatically. He shifted, a small adjustment of angle rather than distance. The kick met empty space, not because it was evaded at the last moment, but because the line of attack had dissolved before completion. The champion lowered his leg calmly. He registered the adjustment. It was efficient, perhaps instinctive, but he had seen efficient movement before. Many experienced practitioners developed evasive instincts over time. One exchange revealed little. He stepped in again, this time with a controlled hand combination, a jab followed by a reverse punch, pulled short before impact. Again, the quiet man did not block in the traditional sense. He did not raise a hard guard or meet force with force. He shifted his center line slightly, just enough that the strikes traveled past him rather than into him. His hands moved minimally, guiding rather than stopping. There was no counterattack. The champion paused. This restraint struck him as unusual. Most challengers, especially those attempting to prove themselves publicly, would seize the opportunity to respond, to demonstrate skill or speed. Counter-striking was expected. It displayed confidence, but the quiet man returned to stillness after each redirection, as if the exchange had not yet begun. From the audience, the early moments appeared uneventful. A few students whispered that the challenger seemed hesitant. Others assumed he was overwhelmed by the champion's presence. The champion did not share that interpretation. He sensed no hesitation, only absence of tension, absence of urgency, absence of performative aggression. He increased tempo slightly, not recklessly, but enough to test reaction time. A low kick flowed into a mid-level strike, followed by a controlled ridge hand aimed toward the shoulder. Each technique was precise. Each halted just short of full contact. And each time, the quiet man dissolved the line of attack with minimal adjustment, never retreating more than necessary, never overcorrecting, still no counter. The champion felt a subtle shift within himself. It was not frustration. It was displacement. His techniques were landing exactly where intended, yet achieving nothing. They met no resistance, no collision through which dominance could be expressed. It was like striking into space shaped to avoid him. He stepped back briefly, resetting distance. From the front table, senior instructors watched more intently now. They had begun to notice what students had not: the efficiency of the challenger's economy. One of them leaned slightly toward another and murmured, "He isn't defending. He's removing the target." The distinction was quiet, but precise. At center mat, the champion adjusted strategy. He decided to escalate contact slightly, still controlled, but firmer. Enough to require a definitive response. Enough to clarify the challenger's level. He closed distance more decisively this time, launching a combination designed to corner rather than test hand strikes, followed by a sweeping attempt to disrupt. Balance. What occurred next happened too, quickly for most spectators to interpret. The quiet man did not retreat. He stepped in, not forcefully, but at an angle that collapsed the champion's structure before the sweep completed. A brief contact at the forearm redirected the strike's line. A second contact near the shoulder disrupted alignment. The champion's momentum carried forward. Without foundation. He caught himself immediately, disciplined reflex, preventing a fall. No strike had been thrown. No visible counter. Yet the exchange had been neutralized before completion. The champion stepped back again, this time slower. He studied the challenger more carefully. The quiet man had already returned to stillness. No follow-up, no claim of advantage, no change in breathing. This absence of pursuit created an unfamiliar psychological space. In structured sparring, exchanges build momentum. One technique leads to another. Dominance accumulates through visible succession. Here, momentum dissolved before forming. The audience sensed something had shifted, though they could not yet articulate what. The champion recognized it more clearly. He was no longer demonstrating, he was investigating. He adjusted his posture subtly, less formal, more adaptive. His next approach abandoned strict tournament rhythm in favor of freer timing. He feinted high and stepped low, attempting to draw reaction through misdirection. The quiet man did react, but not to the feint itself. He moved in response to the champion's center of balance, not the visible strike. Again, minimal contact. Again, no counter. The champion withdrew once more. A quiet realization began forming, not yet fully conscious, but present. He had expected to instruct. Instead, he was being studied. This inversion unsettled the expected hierarchy. From the audience, impatience flickered among some students. The exchange appeared restrained, almost anticlimactic. There had been no decisive strikes, no dramatic takedowns, but among senior observers, silence deepened. They recognized a different conversation taking place, one conducted through timing, distance, and structural disruption. The champion inhaled slowly. He decided to commit, not recklessly, but with full intention. He would close distance decisively and force. Resolution. He stepped forward with speed greater than before, a direct entry combining hand strikes and forward pressure designed to overwhelm defensive subtlety. This time, the quiet man did not dissolve. Backward. He stepped inside the line. What followed unfolded in less than 10 seconds. But its meaning would travel far beyond the exhibition holdout. The champion's forward motion was intercepted at its root, not blocked, not resisted, but redirected before power could consolidate. A brief contact at the lead arm altered trajectory. A second contact at the torso shifted balance. Then, a controlled, precise strike delivered along the shortest available path. It stopped exactly where it needed to. Close enough that the champion felt the force without receiving injury. His body halted. Not because he chose to stop, but because continuation was structurally impossible. Silence spread across the hall. The quiet man had already withdrawn the strike. The moment it reached its endpoint. No follow-up. No display. The exchange was over before the audience fully processed that it had begun. The champion remained upright, unharmed, but immobilized by realization rather than impact. The quiet man stepped back into neutral space, still breathing evenly, still expressionless. Authority had not been attacked. It had been bypassed. And in that bypass, the champion understood something unsettling. He had committed fully, and it had not been enough. For several seconds after the exchange ended, no one spoke. Not because they had witnessed violence, there had been none, but because what had occurred did not fit the audience's expectations of martial resolution. There had been no flurry of strikes, no dramatic fall, no audible impact to punctuate conclusion. The champion remained standing. So did the quiet man, yet everyone present sensed that something definitive had just taken place. It was visible in the champion's posture, not defeated, not injured, but paused. His forward momentum, once fluid and assured, had been interrupted in a way that extended beyond physical balance. He exhaled slowly. The quiet man had already stepped back to neutral distance, hands relaxed again at his sides, as if the exchange had been a brief instructional demonstration rather than a contest. From the audience, murmurs began to form, low, restrained, uncertain. Students leaned toward one another, attempting to interpret what they had seen. "Did he land?" One whispered. "I didn't see a block," another replied. "He stopped him." How? The confusion stemmed from speed, but also from unfamiliarity. The decisive moment had not resembled traditional karate exchanges. There had been no chambered punch, no extended stance, no visible preparation before the final interception. To many, it looked incomplete. To others, particularly senior instructors, it looked inevitable. At the front table, one elderly master leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on his knees. His gaze did not move from the quiet man. He spoke softly, almost to himself. He didn't wait for the technique. He entered before it existed. The distinction carried weight. On the mat, the champion straightened his posture fully. He was not humiliated. The exchange had been too controlled for that. There had been no spectacle, no crowd reaction that forced emotional response. But internally, the structure he relied upon to interpret combat had been challenged. He replayed the moment in rapid mental sequence. His entry had been clean, timing correct, distance appropriate. Yet the challenger had not responded to the visible attack. He had responded to intention itself, intercepting structure before force could organize. Champion bowed slightly, a gesture of respect, but also acknowledgement that the exchange had reached its natural conclusion. The quiet man returned the bow with equal restraint. No words were exchanged. The organizer, unsure whether to resume the program or allow continuation, hesitated at the edge of the mat. He looked to the senior instructors for guidance. One of them gave a small, decisive nod. The demonstration was complete. No rematch was requested. No further explanation offered. The absence of continuation reinforced the finality of what had occurred. It had not been framed as victory or defeat. It had been framed, silently, as demonstration. Yet public perception rarely remains neutral. As both men stepped off the mat, the atmosphere in the hall shifted from uncertainty to contemplation. Students watched the champion closely as he returned to the front row. They searched his expression for signs of frustration or dismissal, cues that would help them interpret the exchange within familiar hierarchy. They found neither. He sat down slowly, posture still upright, but less performative than before. His gaze remained on the mat, not the crowd. He was not embarrassed. He was thinking. Across the hall, the quiet man retrieved his shoes and returned to his seat near the aisle. He did not linger near the mat. He did not engage with organizers or instructors. He simply sat. Several spectators turned discreetly to observe him more closely now. Whispers circulated, fragmented attempts to identify him. Is he from Hong Kong? I've seen him somewhere. Who invited him? But no clear answer emerged. The weight of public expectation, once centered on the champion's performance, began shifting toward understanding the challenger's identity. Yet the quiet man offered no reinforcement for speculation. He did not meet the glances directed at him. He did not adjust posture to acknowledge attention. He watched the remaining demonstrations with the same stillness he had shown earlier. As if nothing unusual had occurred, this composure unsettled observers more than overt dominance would have. Victory often announces itself through energy, adrenaline, celebration, visible relief. Here, there was none. Only equilibrium. At the front, the champion continued analyzing the exchange internally. He replayed entry angles, timing decisions, structural alignment. He did not focus on the final strike alone. He focused on what preceded it, the way his attacks had dissolved before reaching completion. He began recognizing a pattern. Every time he committed to a line of force, the line had vanished. Not resisted. Removed. It was a tactical philosophy he had encountered only in fragments, discussed rarely, demonstrated even less. A method that prioritized interception over exchange, economy over accumulation. The realization formed slowly, but firmly. He had not been outpaced. He had been outpositioned at the level of intention. This distinction mattered deeply within martial hierarchy. Speed could be trained, strength could be developed, but the ability to read structural initiation before movement completed, that belonged to a different tier of mastery. The champion did not feel diminished. He felt reclibrate. As the evening concluded, spectators rose and began filing out in orderly fashion. Conversations filled the hall, subdued, but animated. Some debated what they had seen. Others dismissed the exchange as inconclusive, citing the absence of full contact. But among instructors, discussion took on a quieter, more analytical tone. They spoke not about the strike, but about the entry, not about outcome, but about method. One instructor remarked, "He ended the exchange without escalating it." Another replied, "He chose the exact moment commitment became irreversible." These observations traveled in low voices, but they carried influence. Near the exit, the champion finally approached the quiet man. Witnesses would later recount the moment not for its dialogue, which was brief, but for its tone. The champion bowed first, not ceremonially. We spoke a few words. Unheard by those nearby. The quiet man responded calmly. There was no instruction given, no lecture offered, only acknowledgement. They shook hands briefly, then parted. No announcement was made regarding the challenger's identity that evening, but as people left the exhibition hall, the story had already begun evolving, not as rumor. As inquiry. Who was the quiet man who had stepped forward without rank and dismantled certainty without aggression? The answer would emerge gradually, but the lesson had already begun circulating, carried not by spectacle, but by the unsettling clarity of what witnesses could not fully explain. The weight of public expectation had shifted, and it would not return to its previous balance. In the days following the exhibition, the exchange was described differently depending on who was speaking. Students focused on the final moment, the controlled strike that halted the champion's advance. They debated whether it would have landed cleanly had it not been withdrawn. They discussed speed, reaction time, and whether the distance had truly been closed. Instructors, however, spoke about something else entirely. They spoke about timing, spoke about structure, and they spoke about the silence between movements. The decisive exchange, when analyzed carefully, revealed no dramatic flourish. There had been no extended wind-up, no audible shout, no overt display of power. What ended the engagement was not a heavy blow. It was a sequence of subtle corrections applied at the precise point where commitment turned into vulnerability. Witnesses later reconstructed the moment in fragments. The champion had advanced with full intent. His combination was technically sound, hands aligned, hips engaged, balance forward but controlled. It was not reckless, but in committing fully, he had revealed a narrow window, a transitional instant between preparation and consolidation of force. That was the moment the quiet man entered. He did not intercept the strike at its peak. He did not block at the point of contact. He stepped into the gap. Before structure stabilized, the first touch was light, almost imperceptible, redirecting the lead arm, just enough to alter its trajectory. The second touch disrupted the alignment of the torso, subtly shifting balance from rooted to suspended. And then came the strike. Short. Direct. Delivered along the most economical path available. It traveled no farther than necessary. It did not swing. It did not arc. It simply occupied the space the champion had vacated by committing forward. Had it been delivered with full intent, it would have concluded the exchange definitively, but it was not. It was placed, not thrown, withdrawn. The instant it reached its destination. The message was clear without force. Several senior instructors later admitted that what unsettled them most was not the technique itself. Many had seen efficient strikes before, but the restraint. The quiet man had ended the engagement at the earliest, decisive point. He had not pursued continuation, had not demonstrated superiority through accumulation. He had shown the minimal amount required to clarify outcome. That restraint reframed the entire event. In many martial settings, victory is reinforced through follow-up, a second strike, a takedown, visible dominance. Here, none occurred. The exchange stopped at understanding. This created a different kind of authority. Not one established through aggression, but through inevitability. The champion himself would later recount in private conversations that the inevitability. The champion himself would later recount in private conversations that the most disorienting aspect was not being struck. It was recognizing that he had been read before his combination had fully formed. The quiet man had already adjusted, not in response to visible motion, but in response to intention embedded in posture. The champion described it simply. It felt like he moved before I did. This was not literal. It was perceptual. The quiet man had trained himself to observe not the technique, but the preparation for technique, the tightening of shoulder, the subtle shift of weight, the narrowing of gaze. By entering at that level, he bypassed the need for defensive reaction entirely. Defense, in its conventional form, was unnecessary. There was nothing to defend against, because the attack never matured. The psychological effect of such mastery extended beyond the mat. Those who witnessed the exchange began questioning long-held assumptions about escalation. If a confrontation could be concluded at inception, what value did prolonged exchange serve? The quiet man had not rejected traditional forms. He had simply reduced them to their essential function: efficiency over display. Resolution over repetition. In the weeks that followed, small groups of instructors gathered informally to discuss the event. Some attempted to replicate the timing during controlled practice. Few succeeded. They discovered that interception at intention required more than reflex. It required absence of hesitation. It required willingness to occupy space before certainty of outcome. Most importantly, it required control of ego. To enter without anger. To strike without proving. To withdraw without claiming. The quiet man had demonstrated all three without speaking a word. Meanwhile, the champion continued his training uninterrupted. He did not withdraw from competition. He did not publicly comment on the exchange. His record remained intact. The exhibition had not been official, but those close to him observed subtle adjustments in his approach. He began shortening combinations, reducing unnecessary movement, studying transitional moments more carefully. The encounter had not diminished him. It had refined him. That, too, was part of the silent demonstration. The quiet man did not seek recognition following the event. He did not circulate explanation or advertise what had occurred. He continued teaching privately, refining methods centered on directness and adaptability. When asked about the exhibition, he reportedly answered only, "It was practice." Not dismissal. Not modesty. Simply perspective. What the exhibition hall had witnessed was not a contest between systems. It was a revelation of principle. That principle spread quietly, carried by those perceptive enough to recognize it, not through pamphlets. Not through announcements, but through altered training methods. Students began asking different questions. Not how strong is the strike, but when does it begin? Not how many combinations, but how few are necessary. The demonstration's power lay precisely in its brevity. Had the exchange lasted longer, it might have satisfied spectators. Instead, it unsettled them. It denied closure in the conventional sense, replacing spectacle with clarity. Years later, those who had been present would agree on one detail. The exchange did not feel aggressive. It felt instructional. As if the quiet man had not sought to defeat the champion, but to reveal something to him, and perhaps to everyone watching. The hall had begun the evening structured around rank and reputation. It ended with an invisible shift in understanding. The banners remained. The uniforms remained. But something within the hierarchy had softened. Authority, once defined by record, had encountered authority defined by economy. And economy had prevailed without raising its voice. In the immediate aftermath of the exhibition, there was no public controversy. No official statements were released. No associations issued clarifications. The evening had been categorized formally as an instructional exchange, nothing more. But among those who had witnessed it, the incident did not settle easily. It lingered. not because of physical dominance. The champion had not been injured, nor publicly humiliated, but because the exchange had introduced a fracture in perception, and fractures, even small ones, travel quietly through reputation. Those closest to the undefeated champion noticed the shift first. He did not avoid training. He did not withdraw from teaching. His discipline remained intact, but his rhythm changed. Where he had once trained combinations in long sequences, he began shortening them. Where he had emphasized forceful completion, he began stopping techniques midway, analyzing the moment just before contact. Students observed that he paused more often during demonstrations, holding positions as if studying invisible variables. One of his senior students later recounted, "He stopped showing us how to finish techniques and started showing us where they could fail." The distinction unsettled some of them. They had built their confidence on decisive endings, strikes that landed cleanly, sweeps that completed, forms that resolved with authority. Now their instructor was asking them to examine the fragility within those movements, not publicly, quietly, in private sessions. The champion attempted to reconstruct the exchange. He would step forward in slow motion, recreating his entry from the exhibition. Students were asked to intercept him at different stages, after initiation, during extension, at the point of contact. None could replicate what had occurred. They could block, they could counter, but they could not dissolve the attack before it existed. This failure did not frustrate him. It clarified the gap. He began traveling occasionally to observe other disciplines, not formally, not as a representative of his association, but as a student of timing. He watched practitioners who prioritized interception over exchange. He studied footwork that favored angular entry rather than linear advance. He was not abandoning his foundation. He was investigating its limits. For an undefeated champion, reputation becomes structural. Students gather around certainty. Associations build credibility through record. Invitations arrive because hierarchy appears stable. The exhibition had not erased his victories, but it had introduced nuance. Those who spoke about him afterward did so with added context. He's exceptional, but did you hear about the exhibition? The story circulated without hostility, yet it carried psychological weight. Because it reframed invincibility as conditional. The champion never contested these retellings. He did not attempt to reassert dominance through rematch or public clarification. Instead, he absorbed the lesson privately. This restraint preserved his authority more effectively than denial would have. Witnesses later remarked that his composure after the exchange elevated their respect for him, rather than diminished it. He had not protected ego. He had protected learning. While the champion's evolution unfolded visibly within training circles, the quiet man receded further into anonymity. He did not capitalize on the incident. He did not recount it publicly. In fact, many who sought him out found him difficult to locate. He taught small groups. Sometimes in rented spaces, sometimes in private garages, sometimes outdoors. His instruction focused not on techniques demonstrated at the exhibition, but on principles underlying them: direct entry, economy of motion, adaptive response. Students expecting dramatic applications were often surprised by the simplicity of his teaching. He emphasized fundamentals, posture, distance, reaction to intention rather than movement. One early student later recalled, "He spent an hour teaching us how to stand before he taught us how to strike." This approach contrasted sharply with demonstration culture, where visible results often overshadowed invisible preparation. Months after the exhibition, the champion sought the quiet man privately, not for rematch, for dialogue. The meeting was not publicized. Accounts of it survive only through secondhand recollections. fragments shared by those close to each man. They spoke not about the strike itself. They spoke about timing. The champion asked how interception occurred so early, before structure formed. The quiet man answered simply, "You committed before you arrived." The phrase carried layered meaning. Commitment, in this context, referred not to courage, but to predictability. The moment intention narrows possibility. By reading commitment, the quiet man had entered before adjustment remained possible. There was no boast in his explanation. Only observation. The champion reportedly nodded for a long time before responding. From that meeting forward, mutual respect replaced public hierarchy between them. Not equality of system, equality of understanding. Stories of the exhibition continued circulating, but they evolved in tone. Early retellings focused on surprise, the unknown challenger halting an undefeated champion. Later retellings focused on principle, interception, economy, psychological composure. Instructors began referencing the incident when discussing overcommitment in sparring. "Don't give your intention away," they would say. Some students had never witnessed the exchange firsthand, yet they trained under its shadow. It had become instructional folklore, not exaggerated, but distilled. Years after the event, observers noted that the champion's fighting style had subtly transformed. He still demonstrated powerful strikes, still maintained traditional structure, but he incorporated new elements, shorter entries, more angular footwork, earlier interception attempts. He had not abandoned his roots. He had integrated what he had learned. This integration reflected psychological resilience, the ability to absorb challenge without dissolving identity. He did not become the quiet man. He became a refined version of himself, and that, perhaps, was the deeper victory. What made the psychological aftermath remarkable was not that the champion had been challenged. It was that he had not collapsed under that challenge. Many public figures, when confronted with destabilizing encounters, respond defensively through denial, dismissal, or aggressive reassertion. He did none of these. He accepted the lesson without public confession. He refined without announcement. He allowed growth to occur silently. In doing so, he mirrored, in his own way, the composure demonstrated by the quiet man. The exhibition had not created psychological ruin. It had initiated psychological maturation. Those who had witnessed the exchange often described an unspoken agreement between the two men. Neither sought publicity from the incident. Neither diminished the other in conversation. Neither exaggerated the outcome. The exchange remained what it had always been. A demonstration. But not of dominance. Of possibility. Long after the exhibition hall returned to hosting routine events, its memory lingered in martial circles. Students who had attended would later become instructors themselves when they taught distance management. They referenced that night. When they taught restraint. They referenced that strike withdrawn at its endpoint, and when they taught humility, they referenced the champion's response more than the challenger's skill, because mastery is measured not only by what one can do, but by what one does after being shown what one cannot yet do. The psychological unraveling that followed the Chen Wan that followed the Town shown what one cannot yet do. The psychological unraveling that followed the Tenwan raveling that followed the Qingxiong what one does after being shown what one cannot yet do. Exhibition was not destructive. It was clarifying. It stripped away assumptions about invincibility. It redefined authority as adaptive rather than fixed. And it demonstrated that the most decisive victories often occur internally, far from the mat, far from the audience, far from applause. Years passed before the exhibition came to be spoken of as legend. Not immediately. In the beginning, it existed only as recollection, a story shared between instructors after seminars, mentioned briefly at the edges of tournaments, recalled by those who had been present when discussions of timing and interception arose. It had no official record. No formal documentation. No footage circulated publicly. And perhaps because of that absence, the story matured differently than most martial anecdotes. It was preserved through witnesses rather than promotion. Through reflection rather than spectacle. As the quiet man's name became more widely recognized, Bruce Lee, the exhibition, took on new meaning for those who had attended. At the time of the encounter, many had not known who he was. They had seen only an unranked challenger demonstrating unfamiliar efficiency. But as his teaching spread, first locally, then internationally, former witnesses began connecting that brief exchange to a broader philosophical framework. Interception. Directness. Economy. Adelity. Principles he would later articulate publicly had already been demonstrated silently that evening. The exhibition hall, once just another venue, became retroactively significant, not because it hosted a famous figure, but because it had revealed his philosophy before it was widely understood. Those who had been present began recounting the incident with increasing detail as years passed. Their stories did not inflate the violence. They emphasized restraint. One instructor, interviewed decades later, described it this way: "He didn't defeat the champion, he ended the need to continue." Another witness said, "The most powerful thing he did was stop." These testimonies reinforced a consistent interpretation. The exchange had not been about proving superiority of style. It had been about redefining engagement itself. Even those loyal to traditional systems acknowledged the instructional value of what they had seen. The legend did not erode respect for karate. It expanded understanding of combat philosophy. Equally important to the legacy was the undefeated champion's response in the years that followed. He never distanced himself from the story. When asked about it in private settings, he reportedly spoke without defensiveness. He described the encounter as educational. He incorporated its lesson into his teaching, emphasizing awareness of intention and the danger of overcommitment. Students under his guidance inherited both his technical foundation and his humility. In this way, the champion became part of the legend, not as the man who lost, but as the man who learned publicly without resentment. This distinction preserved his authority rather than diminishing it. The exhibition did not end his influence. It deepened it. As Bruce Lee's reputation expanded through teaching, demonstrations, and eventually film, the philosophical implications of that exhibition spread across martial communities. Training methods began evolving. Instructors introduced interception drills. Students practiced entering during transitional moments rather than exchanging prolonged combinations. The question shifted from, "How do I respond to the attack?" to, "How do I prevent it from forming?" This conceptual shift altered sparring dynamics. Encounters became shorter, more exploratory, less dependent on rigid sequence. While traditional forms remained respected, practitioners began supplementing them with adaptive timing work, a quiet fusion of structure and fluidity. The exhibition had not caused this transformation alone, but it had symbolized its inevitability. As Bruce Lee's global recognition grew, so too did interest in early demonstrations of his skill. Stories surfaced from Seattle. From Oakland, from Los Angeles. And among them, the exhibition with the undefeated karate champion resurfaced repeatedly, not always with identical detail, but always with the same thematic core: a public challenge, a silent exchange, a decisive, restrained resolution. Because the story lacked recorded footage, it resisted sensationalism. It remained anchored in witness testimony, measured, Reflective, often reverent. In martial circles, it was told not as entertainment, but as lesson, a reminder that mastery need not announce itself loudly. Decades later, some who had attended returned to the original venue, by then repurposed for community events. Unrelated to martial arts. The banners were gone, the mats replaced by temporary stages and conference seating. Yet, those who stood in that space could still recall the geometry of the encounter, where the champion had stood, where Bruce Lee had entered, where the exchange had concluded before escalation. They spoke quietly, as if raising their voices might disturb the memory. One former student remarked, "It felt smaller than I remembered, but the moment feels larger." Memory had expanded what architecture could not. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of the legend was what it did not contain. There was no prolonged fight. No dramatic knockout. No visible humiliation. Bruce Lee did not claim victory publicly. He did not recount the story to elevate his reputation. He allowed the lesson to travel without his narration. This absence reinforced the authenticity of the event. It was never framed as conquest. It was framed as demonstration. Teaching, not winning, defined its legacy. Late in his career, when asked about influential encounters, the champion reportedly referenced the exhibition without prompting. He did not describe it as defeat. He described it as exposure to a level of timing he had not yet understood. He told students, "It showed me where my certainty ended." The phrasing revealed no bitterness. Only gratitude. In that reflection, the psychological arc of the encounter reached completion, from public authority through private recalibration into instructional humility. As time moved forward, many direct witnesses passed on. Their students inherited the story, then their students. Each retelling preserved the same essential tone. Calm. Measured. Observational. It was never shouted across gym floors. It was shared quietly after training sessions, when discussions turned philosophical. And always, the story ended the same way. Not with the strike, not with the halted advance, but with the stillness that followed, because that stillness, the moment when continuation became unnecessary, contained the true lesson. The exhibition did not crown a new champion. It did not dethrone an existing one. Its consequence unfolded. Gradually, almost invisibly, training methods became more adaptive. Ego-driven public challenges declined. Cross-disciplinary observation increased. Efficiency gained philosophical legitimacy. It contributed, in its small but precise way, to the broader evolution of martial arts in the modern era. Those who study the incident today often focus on its brevity, less than 10 seconds, but brevity was its strength because it revealed what prolonged conflict often conceals. That mastery is not measured by how long one can fight, but by how early one can resolve. Bruce Lee did not raise his voice that evening. He did not escalate. He did not linger in dominance. He demonstrated, then returned to stillness. And in doing so, he transformed a routine exhibition into a quiet turning point. One remembered not for spectacle, but for clarity. The champion walked away intact. His reputation refined, not ruined. His students wiser, not disillusioned. And the witnesses carried with them a story that would mature into legend, not because of what was done, but because of how little was required to do it. Silence closed the lesson, and it has remained there ever since.